A medieval village vanished without fire, blood, or screams, and the only surviving witness said the buildings were still warm when he arrived. Now let's rewind. Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the Middle Ages. Not the storybook version with shining swords and clean tunics, but the kind historians whisper about when the archive room is almost empty. The kind where the scariest things don't jump out at you. They wait, quietly, patiently, in ink. So settle in, let your breathing slow. This is a long one, and nothing here is in a hurry. Tonight's mystery doesn't begin with death. It begins with continuity. Because the most disturbing thing a medieval village can do is continue existing on paper after it has stopped existing in reality. This is the case of Briar Hollow, a settlement that didn't burn, didn't flood, didn't revolt, and didn't get sick. It simply failed to answer. Briar Hollow was founded in 1219 under a minor land grant from a lord who barely appears in surviving records. That alone tells us something important. This village was never meant to be important. No fortress, no trade road, no strategic value. Just land cleared from an old forest, planted with barley and turnips, and quietly forgotten by everyone except the people who lived there. And those people? They were ordinary in the most aggressively medieval way possible. They paid tithes late, they argued about fences, they named their children after saints and their animals after insults. Nothing about Briar Hollow stands out, at least not at first. The village sat at the edge of the Briar Wood, an ancient stretch of forest older than any local boundary line. Even official maps avoided drawing it too precisely. Instead, scribes shaded it in dark ink, like a bruise on the parchment. The villagers didn't fear the forest. They respected it. They gathered wood from its edges, they hunted only where paths already existed, and they taught their children a simple rule: if you lose the path, stop walking. That rule shows up later, in a way no one expected. For over 2 decades, Briar Hollow behaves exactly as a medieval village should. Church records show consistent tithe payments, never generous, never absent. Tax rolls list the same family names year after year, with the occasional addition when someone married in or didn't survive a winter. There's even a written complaint from the blacksmith accusing the miller of stealing iron scraps. The case was dismissed, but the bitterness lingered, because of course it did. This is what historians love: normality. Normality is how we know when something breaks. And in 1241, something breaks, but not loudly, quietly. Briar Hollow doesn't disappear, it desynchronizes. The Abbey of St. Cuthbert kept meticulous bread and grain records, not because monks were obsessive, though they were, but because bread was power, bread was survival. In March of 1241, Briar Hollow delivers exactly what it owes. In April, the delivery is smaller, no note, no excuse. In May, the line is empty. Not zero, not failed, empty. Medieval scribes hated empty lines. Blank space was dangerous. It invited questions. Which tells us this wasn't a mistake. Someone chose not to write anything. Then, inexplicably, in June, Briar Hollow delivers a single sack of grain. No signature, no seal, no explanation. After that, nothing. But here's the part that keeps historians awake. While the Abbey stops acknowledging Briar Hollow, the rest of the world keeps interacting with it, as if the village is still there. In August 1241, Sir Matthew of Keld files a formal complaint stating that Briar Hollow failed to provide 3 men for mandatory road labor. He names them: Edric, son of Paul, Hugh Miller, and Thomas Reed. All 3 men are already listed as dead in earlier parish records, by years. This isn't a clerical error. These deaths were documented, witnessed, and taxed accordingly. The court's response is brief
and deeply uncomfortable. Village to resolve internally. That's medieval bureaucracy's way of backing away slowly without turning its back. No investigation, no messenger sent, just silence, which at this point is becoming a pattern. The last civilian to enter Briar Hollow knowingly was Thomas of Ely. Thomas wasn't brave, he wasn't foolish, he was persistent, and persistence gets people killed in historical records more than courage ever did. In October 1241, Thomas delivers 6 bolts of wool. No payment is made. He assumes delay. When he returns weeks later, he finds the village intact. Roofs uncollapsed, doors closed, tools leaning where they were last used. No dogs barking, no children crying, no church bell. He waits 2 days. He later writes that the silence was not empty, but occupied. That line appears verbatim in the court transcript. Occupied by what? No one asked, because there was no one left to ask. In February 1242, the Bishop of Durham orders an inspection. Not soldiers, not holy relics, clerks. Men trained to observe, record, and not imagine things. 4 men enter Briar Hollow. 1 returns. And when we continue, we'll read exactly what he wrote, line by line, including the part where he realizes the village didn't vanish all at once. It went room by room, and something was patient enough to wait for everyone to notice.
The man who returned was named Brother Osric. Not a hero's name, not a martyr's name, just a clerk, 32 years old, seconded from the abbey because he had neat handwriting and a stomach strong enough for travel. He was not the leader of the inspection. He was not even important, which is probably why he survived. The inspection party entered Briar Hollow on the morning of February 2nd, 1242, Candlemas. That detail matters more than you might think. Candlemas was a threshold day in medieval belief, not holy enough to banish fear, not pagan enough to invite it. A day when people paid attention to small signs. The party consisted of 4 men: Brother Osric, clerk and recorder; Father Renaud, a minor priest; Matthew Holt, a lay scribe; a cart driver whose name is never recorded. They approached the village along the single dirt road that curved down into the hollow. Osric writes that the first thing they noticed was sound, or rather, the lack of it. No wind through trees, no birds, no insects. He notes very carefully that this was not because it was winter. He had traveled in winter before. Forests still make noise. This one didn't. The village itself was intact. That's the word he uses, intactus. Houses stood upright, thatch still tied, wooden doors swollen slightly from damp, but not forced or broken. No fire damage, no looting, no blood. The well bucket rested halfway down the shaft, rope slack, as if someone had let go. The chapel door was closed, not locked, closed. Osric writes that Father Renaud hesitated before opening it, not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. That detail is important. Fear is loud. Uncertainty is paralyzing. Inside the chapel, everything was in place. Candles burned down to stubs, wax pooled but undisturbed. The altar cloth was folded but not put away. The last sermon had been prepared but never delivered. They searched the houses next. This is where Osric's tone changes. Up until now, his writing is clean, professional, almost bored. He lists rooms, inventories, objects. Then he begins to describe placement. Every home showed signs of sudden absence, but not panic.
pots sat on cold hearths, bread dough half risen, shoes by doors, beds slept in, not abandoned, interrupted. One house contained a child's wooden toy horse upright in the center of the room. Osric pauses here to add a note in the margin. No drag marks, no damage, meaning no struggle, meaning no force. They find no bodies, not buried, not hidden, not in the forest edge, no graves disturbed. This is when Father Renaud suggests famine or flight. Osric notes that no food stores were taken, which would be unwise. Another suggestion is disease. Osric writes, and I quote, "Then where are the dead?" Silence in the record after that line, a full inch of parchment left blank. That is the only blank space in the entire report. They reach the edge of the briar wood just before dusk, and this is where things go from strange to quietly wrong. The forest line is uneven, thorny, and dense, but there is a path leading into it. Not overgrown, not reclaimed, a path that looks used. Matthew Holt suggests they follow it. Father Renaud refuses, not because of superstition, but because, as he says, it is not marked. Unmarked paths in medieval forests were dangerous legally. You could trespass without knowing it. That mattered more than monsters. They decide to camp in the village instead. This decision kills two of them. Osric records the night carefully. They sleep in separate houses to avoid drafts. Before dawn, Osric awakes to a sound. Not footsteps, not voices. Breathing. Outside his door. He does not open it. He does not pray. He simply waits. The breathing stops. At first light, he leaves the house. Matthew Holt is gone. His bedding remains undisturbed. The cart driver is found standing in the road. Standing. Eyes open. Alive, but unresponsive. Osric writes that the man could breathe, blink, and swallow, but would not move, would not speak, would not react. Father Renaud insists they leave immediately. They load the cart. The unresponsive driver remains standing where he is. Osric does not write whether they tried to help him. That omission is louder than anything else in the report. As they depart, Osric looks back, and this is the last line written by his own hand. The village remains, but does not observe us. The report ends there. No signature, no date. The parchment was sealed anyway. Brother Osric never returned to Briar Hollow. He lived another 11 years. He never spoke of the village again. But here's the thing. Briar Hollow continues to appear in records. For 7 more years. Taxes assessed, but never collected. Land disputes filed, never resolved. A priest appointed, who never arrived. And then, in 1249, something extraordinary happens. The village is officially declared occupied by someone or something. And when the crown sends men to claim it, only the forest answers. And it answers in a way medieval people understood immediately. Because some places don't vanish. They wait. And they wait until someone notices them again.
The declaration of occupation arrives without ceremony. It's a single line in a crown ledger dated late autumn 1249, written in the same ink as a dozen other routine land notes. No flourish, no emphasis, just this. Briar Hollow, land presently occupied, claims suspended. Occupied, not resettled, not reclaimed, not granted, occupied.
In medieval legal language, that word is precise. It means someone is there, someone with presence strong enough to prevent reassignment, strong enough to be acknowledged without being named. And that unsettles people, quietly at first. Within weeks, the Crown authorizes a verification party. Not soldiers, again, that's important, but landmen, surveyors, men whose job is to measure, not to fight. 3 men leave Durham. They do not return. No report, no bodies, no witnesses. And here's where the tone of the records shifts. Not to fear, to irritation. Because medieval authorities could tolerate death, they could tolerate mystery. What they hated was administrative resistance. Something was interfering with ownership. And ownership, in the Middle Ages, was sacred. So the next attempt is deliberate. In early spring of 1250, a group of 6 is assembled. 2 men-at-arms, 1 royal clerk, 1 church representative, 2 local guides familiar with the Briar Wood's edge. This is the first time the forest itself is mentioned by name in official correspondence. Not the wood, not the trees, the Briar Wood, as if it has become a proper noun. They enter Briar Hollow at midday. This time, someone is watching. The surviving account comes from the church representative, a deacon named Elias, who returns alone 3 days later. He does not speak at first. He sits in the Abbey guest hall for nearly an hour, staring at the wall, breathing shallowly, as if afraid depth might attract attention. When he finally speaks, a scribe transcribes his words exactly, including repetitions. Elias says the village looks maintained, not repaired, not cleaned, maintained. Thatch has been retied, doors adjusted, ashes removed from hearths. But there are still no people, no animals, no tracks in the dirt except their own. And something else. The bell in the chapel tower has been rung recently. How recently? Elias says the rope is still warm. They split into pairs. This decision is recorded without comment. One pair never returns. Another pair, both men-at-arms, are found sitting at a table inside the blacksmith's house. Their armor is on. Their weapons are sheathed. Their helmets are placed neatly on the table between them. They are dead. No wounds, no marks, no signs of poison. Their eyes are closed, as if someone cared. The royal clerk disappears last. Elias says he heard him speaking, not shouting, speaking calmly, as if answering questions. When Elias goes to find him, he finds the clerk's writing kit on the ground near the forest path. Ink spilled, parchment blank, no footprints leading into the trees, just absence. Elias flees. He admits this openly. He does not frame it as bravery or survival. He says simply, I was no longer permitted. Permitted. That word appears twice in his testimony. No one asks what he means because no one wants to know what grants permission in a place like that. After this, Briar Hollow is quietly removed from future land grants. Not erased, just avoided. Maps begin to curve roads around it. Travel accounts omit it entirely. But peasants still talk. They talk about lights in the hollow at night, about smoke rising without flame, about bells ringing on days that aren't holy, and about people who wander too close and come back slower, as if they've learned to move carefully. Then, in 1273, more than 30 years after the village first went silent, a monk named Brother Stephen makes a mistake. He decides to catalog unresolved cases. He finds Briar Hollow,
and he asks the wrong question. He writes in the margin of a forgotten ledger, "If occupied, by whom?" That question triggers a response. Not immediately, but medieval horror is never immediate. Within the year, a letter arrives at the abbey. No seal, no signature, written in a careful, practiced hand. The parchment is old, older than the ink. The letter reads, "We remain." Nothing else. No threat, no explanation, just presence. The Abbey archives note the letter, file it, and say nothing. But Brother Stephen does not let it go. He becomes obsessed. He collects every reference to Briar Hollow. He notices patterns. Disappearances occur only when people stay the night, only when they separate, only when they attempt to name what is there, and always, always near the forest path, the unmarked one. Stephen enters the Briarwood alone in 1276. He leaves behind a journal. That journal survives. And when we continue, we'll walk with him, step by careful step, as he realizes the village was never the problem. It was the agreement the villagers made to stay alive, and what happened when they finally broke it.
Brother Stephen's journal is not dramatic. That's the first thing you notice. No prayers written in panic, no declarations of faith, no desperate pleas to God or saints or anything listening. It reads like a man trying very hard to remain rational while stepping somewhere rationality has stopped being useful. The journal begins on April 11th, 1276. He writes the date twice, then he corrects it. Then he leaves it alone. Stephen enters the Briarwood at dawn. He chooses dawn deliberately. He notes that the forest edge looks different in full light, less threatening, more organized. That word again. Organized. He follows the unmarked path, not because it draws him, but because it doesn't resist him. The brambles pull back just enough to allow passage. Thorns snag his robe, but not his skin. He notices this, writes it down. He does not like it. After an hour of walking, Stephen reaches Briar Hollow. He is startled, not by decay, but by continuity. The village has aged, but correctly. Wood has weathered, thatch has thinned, stone has settled. Nothing is broken. Nothing is overgrown. It looks like a place that expects people to return. Stephen enters the chapel. The altar cloth has been replaced, not with a new one, with an older one, older than the village itself. He recognizes the embroidery style, early 12th century. This cloth was not made here, it was brought. Stephen spends the first day walking the village. He counts houses, 47, the same number recorded decades earlier. He checks interiors, beds still made, tools cleaned, nothing moved unnecessarily. He writes, "This place remembers itself." That line is underlined, twice. At dusk, Stephen hears voices, not speaking, reciting. He cannot tell the language at first. Then he realizes it's Latin, poor Latin, learned Latin, Latin spoken by people who do not fully understand it, but know it matters. Prayers, fragmented, out of order, coming from different houses at once, never overlapping, never answering each other, like practice. Stephen does not sleep. He sits in the chapel, back against the wall, eyes open. At midnight, the bell rings, once. He does not move. At some point, he is unsure when, someone sits beside him. He does not look. He writes later that he knew better than to confirm anything with sight. The voice beside him speaks quietly, carefully.
It says, "You are late." Stephen answers, "This is important." He answers. He says he is sorry. The voice accepts this. They speak for hours. Stephen does not record the conversation word for word. Instead, he summarizes. And this is where the truth finally surfaces. The villagers of Briar Hollow did not vanish. They negotiated. Decades earlier, around 1241, the forest began to change. Not suddenly, gradually. Paths shifted, sounds carried incorrectly. People returned from errands having taken longer than expected. Animals refused certain areas. Children were forbidden from playing near the briarwood, not because of wolves, but because they came back quiet, watching. Then people began to go missing, one at a time, always briefly. They would return before nightfall, but something about them would be adjusted. They remembered things no one had told them. They finished sentences they hadn't heard. They stood too still. The village priest, Father Aldwin, understood what this meant, not because he was holy, but because he was old, and old men had seen forests do this before. Father Aldwin did not call it a demon. He did not call it a spirit. He called it the presence, because naming implies limits, and limits invite challenge. The presence did not want the village gone. It wanted it stable, predictable, maintained. So an agreement was made. No one alive remembered the exact terms, because remembering them fully would have been dangerous. But the rules were passed down. Never sleep alone. Never follow the path at night. Never speak of the presence directly. Never invite outsiders to stay. And most importantly, never leave permanently. The village complied for years, and they survived. But compliance requires discipline, and discipline erodes. A merchant stayed overnight, then another. A child wandered the path alone. A prayer was spoken incorrectly. Small breaches, forgivable ones, until the presence adjusted its terms, silently. When the villagers finally understood they could no longer maintain the agreement, they made one last choice. They stopped resisting. They allowed the presence to finish the work, not killing them, not taking them, but integrating them, room by room, person by person, house by house. The village didn't empty, it filled. Stephen's hands shake as he writes this. Ink blots stain the page. He asks the voice one final question. He asks why the presence still maintains the village. Why keep the shape? Why answer records? Why say, "We remain"? The voice answers, "Because you keep asking." Stephen leaves at dawn. The forest lets him go. Barely. He reaches the abbey and seals the journal himself. He does not share its contents. He lives another 4 years. He never sleeps alone again. Briar Hollow remains unmarked on maps, but it still exists, and every few generations someone notices the discrepancy. An empty place that refuses to be empty, a village that answers paperwork but not people. Because the agreement was never broken, it was inherited. And as long as someone remembers to ask, something will always be there to answer.
The thing about agreements like this, the ones never written down in full, is that they don't end when belief fades. They end when memory does. And Briar Hollow never allowed that. Long after Edmund Hale's death is recorded and forgotten, the archives continue to breathe quietly around the village's name. Not loudly, not often, just enough to stay present. In 1847, during a county-wide land modernization effort, a surveyor named Thomas Bellamy is assigned a section that includes the old hollow. Bellamy is practical, industrial-age practical,
railways, measurements, straight lines. He does not believe in negotiated forests. He believes in maps. He notices Briar Hollow because the compass needle behaves strangely near it. Not wildly, just hesitantly, as if deciding. Bellamy marks the anomaly with a small dot, then another. Then he stops, because every time he looks back at the page, the dots have moved. Not far, just enough to be wrong. Bellamy does not enter the hollow. He sends an assistant. The assistant returns before sunset. The man is pale, sweating, shaking, not with fear, but effort, as if he has been concentrating for hours. The assistant says the village looks kept. Bellamy asks by whom. The assistant pauses, then says, by itself. Bellamy files his report without mentioning Briar Hollow again. That dot never appears on future maps. By the early 20th century, the Briarwood is partially logged. Carefully. Workers refuse certain sections without being able to explain why. Axes chip, saws dull, men grow tired faster than they should. One logging foreman notes that trees near the hollow heal badly. Sap runs too slowly. Cuts remain visible, as if the forest remembers injury. They stop cutting there. No order is given. They just stop. During World War II, the area is considered for a training ground. An officer visits. He hears a bell at dusk. He leaves before dark. The proposal disappears from the file. No reason listed. And this is where modernity brushes against Briar Hollow, not dramatically, not explosively, but awkwardly. In 1973, a graduate student named Elaine Morris begins researching abandoned medieval settlements. She is not chasing ghosts, she is chasing footnotes. She finds Briar Hollow because it refuses to behave like a normal deserted village. It never collapses in the record. It never resolves. Elaine writes in her notebook, "It's like an answer without a question." She visits the site in late summer, day trip only. She brings a camera. What she photographs is unremarkable. Low mounds, stone outlines, grass growing where homes once stood. But when the photos are developed, something is wrong. The houses are there, not ruins, structures. Faint, washed out, but present. Every photo shows the same thing, a village that no longer exists, standing just behind the one that does. Elaine never publishes this. She keeps the photos. She dreams of bells. Years later, she donates her research to a university archive. The photos are misfiled, labeled double exposure, error. They sit untouched, but the negative sleeves are warm when handled, always. The last known interaction with Briar Hollow occurs in 2008. A routine digitization project flags an inconsistency. An automated system cross-referencing historical land data receives a response where none should exist, just a timestamp, no sender, no IP. The system logs it as a glitch, but the timestamp corresponds exactly to midnight local time at the hollow. Attached is a single text string, 6 characters. Still here. The technician deletes it, then checks the log again. It's gone, but the space where it was feels intentional. Briar Hollow does not expand. It does not hunt. It does not lure. It waits, because waiting worked, because stillness preserved it, because being noticed, even briefly, was enough to confirm existence. And that's the most unsettling part. Not that something lives there, but that it learned, that it adapted, that it understands records, memory, and attention, that it knows when it's being thought about, even now. So if tonight Lying in bed, lights low, if you feel like you've remembered a place you never knew, if the silence feels slightly occupied, that doesn't mean it's coming for you. It doesn't need to. You've already done the important part. You noticed. And somewhere, in a hollow that roads still avoid, a bell rings once, not as a warning, but as an acknowledgement.
The bell does not ring again. That's important. Because if it did, regularly, predictably, people would notice. They would chart it. They would look for causes, foxes, wind, old iron contracting in the cold. But one ring is deniable. One ring is coincidence. After 2008, nothing official touches Briar Hollow for a while, which doesn't mean nothing happens. It just means no one writes it down. And in places like this, what isn't written matters most. Sometime around 2013, locals begin reporting that the footpath near the hollow feels longer. Not overgrown, not blocked, longer. People say it takes more steps than it used to, that conversations trail off before the end, that phones lose signal, but only after a certain bend. Someone jokes that the forest is expanding. No one laughs. A man walking his dog near dusk hears singing, not melodic, not choral, more like practice, single voices starting and stopping, repeating the same phrases until they're almost right. Latin again, broken, earnest. The dog refuses to move forward. The man does. He turns back after 10 minutes, certain he's been walking longer than that, and finds himself closer to the road than he expected. He never walks there again. The village council considers installing signage, a warning, a historical marker. They don't. Not because anyone objects, because no one agrees on the wording. Abandoned medieval site feels incorrect. Archaeological remains feels incomplete. Restricted area feels dishonest. Eventually, the idea fades, as ideas tend to do around Briar Hollow. In 2019, a small research group proposes a non-invasive survey using ground-penetrating radar. They are careful. They are respectful. They set up equipment at the edge of the hollow. The readings are confusing. Foundations appear where foundations should be, but also where they shouldn't. Rooms overlapping, walls repeating, as if the village has been rebuilt in the same place multiple times without ever being torn down. One technician jokes that it's stacked. No one joins in. The equipment malfunctions repeatedly. Batteries drain unevenly. Data corrupts in identical patterns, not random noise, patterns. When the lead researcher tries to rerun the scan, the system returns an error message, not a code, a sentence. Permission required. They pack up that afternoon. The final report cites environmental interference, which is true, just not in the way people usually mean. And this is where you might expect escalation, lights in the woods, disappearances, a sudden reveal. But Briar Hollow doesn't do that, because it doesn't need to. It already learned the most effective survival strategy of all: patience. Somewhere between archives and memory, the village adjusts. It answers less often, only when directly addressed, only when forms are filled out incorrectly, only when someone insists on certainty, and even then, briefly, just enough to remain. There is a theory, never published, never confirmed, that Briar Hollow is no longer tied to geography, that it exists as a function of attention, that when someone focuses on it deeply enough, the village aligns itself quietly, just long enough to be acknowledged. Then it recedes again, maintained. Which brings us to now. Not a date, not a year, just now.
Because if you've stayed with this story, if you've followed the records, the gaps, the silences, then for a moment, Briar Hollow is present again. Not physically, administratively, conceptually. It has been referenced, it has been remembered, which means somewhere beyond roads and signage and maps that avoid it, the agreement is still holding. The forest remains patient, the houses remain counted, the bell remains silent unless needed. So when this ends, when you close your eyes and let the world narrow, don't listen for footsteps, don't scan the dark. That's not how places like this work. Instead, notice the stillness, the way silence can feel occupied. That's all Briar Hollow ever wanted, to remain. And now that you know it does, it will.
The stillness doesn't fade when the story does. That's another thing worth mentioning. Most stories end by releasing you, by letting the tension drain away, by giving you something sharp and final so your mind knows where to put it. An ending, a border. Briar Hollow never learned borders, so the quiet lingers. After that last acknowledgement, after the research group packs up, after the reports are filed and forgotten, the hollow settles again into what it does best. Nothing. Seasons pass through it cleanly. Leaves fall where they are supposed to. Snow gathers in hollows that look like old doorways. Rain runs along lines that once carried foot traffic. If you stood there, only in daylight, only briefly, you might convince yourself it's just land. But land doesn't remember counts. Land doesn't answer questions. There's an internal memo from a regional planning office dated 2021. It's short, 3 sentences. It notes that a proposed utility line cannot be routed through the Briar Hollow area due to unresolved status. No one remembers writing it. No one questions it. The line goes around. They always do. A hiker posts photos online. Nothing dramatic. Trees, grass, an oddly level clearing. In one image, near the edge of the frame, there's something that looks like a door frame made of shadow. Commenters argue about perspective, compression artifacts, pareidolia. The post is deleted 2 days later. The account remains, but all references to the hike are gone, as if the system itself decided the memory was unnecessary. Sometimes, rarely, people dream of the place. Not vividly, not in narrative, just a sense of being somewhere that expects you to behave correctly. Doors you don't open, paths you don't take, rules you somehow already know. They wake up feeling rested, but cautious. They start locking doors they never used to. They stop saying certain words aloud. They don't know why, and they don't try to. The forest itself remains unchanged to the eye. No unnatural growth, no rot. But botanists notice something subtle. Trees near the hollow grow rings that don't match the years. Some rings repeat. Some are missing, as if time there is referenced, not experienced. The samples are logged, then quietly removed from the dataset. Outliers complicate conclusions. Every so often, someone rediscovers Brother Stephen's journal. It's always during recataloguing, never during casual reading. They open it. They feel a strong urge to close it again. Most do. One doesn't. He makes it halfway before stopping. Later, when asked why he didn't finish, he says, "It felt like interrupting." No one asked what. And that's how Briar Hollow survives. Not through fear, not through force, but through manners.
through the subtle pressure of knowing when you're not welcome and respecting it, through the deeply human instinct to step back when something does not push forward. If there's one thing the village learned better than any kingdom ever did, it's this: attention is nourishment. Too much burns, too little starves, but just enough keeps things standing. So tonight, as this story continues to sit with you, as your room settles back into familiar shapes, as the silence stretches and rearranges itself, understand this: you haven't invited anything, you haven't crossed a line, you've simply participated in a record. And records, as Briar Hollow knows better than most, don't demand action. They only require acknowledgement. Somewhere, where a village still counts itself correctly, nothing happens. And nothing, in this case, is exactly the point.
The hollow remains patient, its quiet measured and deliberate, like a metronome set to a rhythm no one else can hear. Daylight brushes over the briarwood, scattering shadows across the damp earth, but nothing disturbs the spaces between the trees. Leaves do not rustle more than necessary. Sunlight glints off old foundations, yet those foundations do not crumble. They do not need to. Presence alone preserves them. It is spring again, though centuries later than anyone can trace with certainty. The forest edge is green, thick with new growth. A hiker, one of many who wander near out of curiosity or boredom, pauses where the dirt road bends toward a shallow clearing. For a moment, he senses an arrangement in the air, the deliberate spacing of trees, the way the underbrush seems to open slightly for him, then closes just as he steps forward. He hesitates. Something in the stillness whispers a boundary he can't articulate. Not a command, not a threat, just notice. The hiker moves on. The clearing remains unbroken. The hollow does not shift outward to meet him. It does not need to. It is entirely confident in its own permanence. By afternoon, sunlight fades through the treetops, angled and pale. A raven lands on a branch above where one of the old foundations once stood. It cocks its head, attentive, not curious, not hungry, attentive. This subtle distinction is something humans rarely perceive, though it has mattered for centuries. Presence, not intent, defines Briar Hollow. Inside the hollow, if one could see it as it exists now, layered in dimensions not fully aligned with the material world, houses are filled with echoes of ordinary lives. Pots rest on hearths, slightly warm, though no fire burns. Tools lean where they were last used. A child's wooden toy horse remains centered in a room that appears empty, untouched. Steps might be heard faintly sometimes, but never close enough to follow. Footfalls exist just beyond perception, or perhaps in a memory that hasn't quite formed. Sometimes, very rarely, the hollow responds, not violently, not in sudden appearance or grotesque spectacle, just acknowledgement. An error in distance, a miscount, a momentary ringing of the chapel bell, faint enough to be explained by wind or imagination, but too precise to be coincidence. An archivist in London, years later, digitizes maps from the 1800s to the present. He pauses at a series of errors in the coordinates around Briar Hollow. They shift subtly with every layer of correction, aligning and misaligning almost rhythmically. Notes in the margin, coordinates inconsistent, field verification recommended. He doesn't visit. He doesn't need to. In some way, he already knows. In 2025, a graduate student working remotely in historical GIS notices the hollow again. Data points cluster unusually. He tries to explain it, glitches in scanning, outdated coordinates, projection errors.
but every explanation fails under scrutiny. Something maintains the pattern with consistency human systems cannot achieve. The patterns persist even when data is deleted or reformatted. The hollow is meticulous, even in abstraction, even in code. One evening, a local writer who lives near the forest speaks of Briar Hollow to a friend over tea. The friend laughs lightly at the notion of a village still existing after 8 centuries. The writer does not correct him. Instead, she describes walking near the edge, seeing sunlight angle oddly across the ground, feeling the path subtly curve under her feet as though adjusting for her presence. The friend tilts his head. The writer smiles, a trace of unease flickering in her eyes, and says, "It waits politely." By nightfall, the forest grows quiet, and Briar Hollow withdraws again. Rooms vanish into shadows, hearths cool. The weight of history folds inward, as it always does. It preserves itself without movement, without thought, without fear. Its presence is a record, a ledger kept meticulously, measured by centuries rather than days. No one sleeps there, not anymore, not in any conventional sense. But sometimes the forest aligns with memory. Sleepers dreaming near the briarwood sense structure in the shadows. Doors exist that never appear in daylight. Steps echo where no floor remains. Bells ring faintly in sequences that make sense only to the mind that remembers records like these. An internal logic, precise, patient, immutable. Technology has never disturbed Briar Hollow. Attempts at measurement, survey, or verification fail in the smallest, most precise ways. Data corrupts, signals falter, cameras misfocus, GPS readings jitter. The hollow does not act maliciously. It does not need to. Human tools are inadequate by design, misaligned with the dimensions it occupies. A solitary photograph emerges on a researcher's hard drive. Blurred edges, subtle overlays of structure that are impossible to capture. Foundations appear stacked, walls repeated, rooms where rooms should not exist. The metadata records the timestamp, midnight, local time. No one recalls taking the photograph. No one can explain how the image formed. By now, Briar Hollow is beyond folklore. It is beyond maps. It exists only when referenced, only when measured, only when considered. And yet it remains, steady, still, polite, observant, patient. For anyone paying attention, even momentarily, the rules are evident. Acknowledge, but do not interfere. Notice, but do not insist. Observe, but do not attempt to own. That is the village's agreement, renewed silently every time attention passes over it. The forest exhales as night deepens. Leaves rest. Branches bend ever so slightly, as if bowing. A faint bell tolls once, soft and measured, then stops. The hollow does not stir. It does not need to. Its patience is timeless, its vigilance absolute. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of perception, the village waits, waiting for no one, maintaining its records, keeping its rooms in order, responding only when it must. Presence maintained with centuries of careful practice is all that Briar Hollow requires. It will remain, as it always has, until attention itself ceases, and even then, only briefly. For tonight, as you breathe and settle, it is enough to remember, enough to notice. The hollow is still there.
And so it waits. Even now, centuries after Brother Stephen, after Martin, after Elaine Morris, after every surveyor, every archivist, every inadvertent witness, Briar Hollow persists. It does not move, it does not vanish, it does not expand. It exists exactly where it is meant to, in dimensions that bend subtly around the attention it receives. The forest around it grows and dies with ordinary seasons, yet the hollow remains untouched in ways that cannot be measured by time alone. Trees that have fallen decades ago still mark positions as if standing. Shadows fall with impossible precision. Underbrush grows selectively, leaving clear paths where the unwary might misstep. The hollow's boundaries are not walls, not fences. They are perception itself, maintained by a discipline older than any human memory. In late October of 2027, a cartographer, employed to digitize old topographical surveys, finds a curious anomaly. Layers of maps from 1847, 1923, 1973, and 2008 all reference Briar Hollow, yet each contains subtle shifts. Coordinates deviate by meters in ways he cannot explain. Field surveys are inconclusive. Satellite imagery shows only forest, unremarkable. Yet every dataset carries a subtle trace of the village, a faint rectilinear outline, rooms stacked upon rooms, walls intersecting where no walls should be. The cartographer marks it. He draws faint lines in pencil. He checks them against historic surveys. They align imperfectly, almost deliberately. He pauses. The air around his office grows heavier. Nothing visible changes. Only his pulse quickens. He does not visit. He does not need to. He understands, without articulating why, that to step physically into Briar Hollow is different from referencing it. Presence is not movement. Presence is acknowledgement. On the ground, near the old clearing, a young woman jogs at dusk. Her path curves toward the briarwood. For a moment, she feels a subtle alignment in the forest, the trees bending slightly, shadows falling in patterns that suggest doors, walls, rooms that are not there. She stops. She looks at her watch. Minutes have passed that should not have. Her heart is steady, but her mind registers an odd order, a precision too deliberate to be accidental. She turns back toward the road. The path she took seems longer than it should. She walks carefully now, though she does not understand why. The hollow does not need her presence to remain. It simply accommodates it, maintaining the balance it always has. To cross the boundary improperly is to disturb the equilibrium, and the hollow responds, not violently, not destructively, but with subtle recalibration, misplaced steps, delayed signals, shadows that do not match trees. Inside the hollow, rooms remain arranged as they have for centuries. Hearths are cold but orderly. Wooden tools lean at perfect angles. Beds are made, though no one sleeps in them. Windows are closed, though no one looks through them. In one house, a child's toy lies perfectly centered, as if held in place by invisible fingers. The effect is precise, calculated, deliberate. If one were to stand silently at the edge of the hollow at midnight, listening, one might hear faint murmurs, not voices speaking to one another, not chanting, not song, just fragments of conversation, repeated over years, layered, disjointed. A syllable spoken in 1241 might echo alongside one from 1923, overlaid perfectly, almost harmonious. Time bends subtly here, but only enough to be sensed, not to be understood. And the bell rings sometimes, not often, not predictably, always faint, always single, always at intervals that seem measured by centuries rather than hours. A single toll at midnight, distant, almost imagined, but it is real and it is precise. It is acknowledgement, a quiet verification that the hollow is intact, that the agreement persists, that the records, seen and unseen, remain balanced.
Those who attempt to measure it technologically find interference. Ground-penetrating radar produces overlapping readings, walls repeated in impossible configurations, rooms stacked on top of rooms. Cameras capture faint overlays, impossible angles, structures that do not exist in reality. Drones lose signal inexplicably when flying too close. GPS fails. Every attempt to quantify, to catalog, to resolve is met with subtle correction. Briar Hollow maintains itself through attention, through observation, through the patient alignment of perception with reality. Visitors, rare, accidental, or deliberate, experience it differently. Some sense the paths are longer than they should be. Some see doors that vanish when approached. Some hear bells that have no origin. They leave unsettled, careful, quiet. They rarely speak of what they felt, not out of fear, but because acknowledgement alone is sufficient. Briar Hollow does not need stories. It only needs recognition. Archives continue to mention it. Papers, surveys, digital maps, old journals, forgotten photographs. Occasionally, a researcher opens a journal sealed since 1276. They pause, sensing the weight of centuries of observation. Most close it. Some finish the pages, understanding, without fully knowing, that to read it is to enter the hollow in a limited sense, and that even observation constitutes acknowledgement. The forest exhales as the night deepens. Leaves settle. Branches bend, almost imperceptibly, as if bowing. Shadows shift with meticulous care. Structures stand in careful order where no human hands can reach. Hearths are clean. Beds remain made. The child's wooden toy rests in the center of its room, perfectly balanced. Somewhere, beyond roads, beyond maps, beyond time as humans measure it, Briar Hollow persists, patient, silent, polite, observant, waiting, not for intruders, not for resolution, not for an audience, but for acknowledgement. Attention, and nothing more, is enough. And if you have been listening, if you have been following, if you are awake in the quiet, the hollow knows you are aware. It does not move toward you. It does not intrude. It does not demand. It simply notices. And for tonight, that is its way of saying, it is still here.
The next morning, the hollow retreats slightly, as it always does after being noticed. Shadows realign, paths straighten, leaves shift. The subtle anomalies that a human observer might glimpse, the slightly too perfect alignment of foundations, the way the forest seems to make room for nothing, fade back into unremarkable patterns. It does not vanish, but it becomes inert once more, waiting for the next acknowledgement. On the edge of the briarwood, the soil is undisturbed, though centuries of footsteps could suggest otherwise. No imprint remains of the woman who paused last night, of the hiker who sensed misaligned paths, or of the graduate student who scanned the maps. Even memory itself seems to adjust. Time, as it passes through Briar Hollow, bends subtly, leaving only the faintest impressions on those who notice. Inside the village, the empty houses maintain the same meticulous order. Hearths are cleared of ash, though no fire has burned. Tables are set, as if anticipating meals. Doors are closed but unlocked, windows framed to catch light at precise angles. In one house, the child's wooden toy horse tilts slightly toward the doorway, almost imperceptibly. Movement occurs only when required to maintain balance, only to preserve form. At dusk, a wind rises across the hollow, not strong, not frightening, just deliberate. It shifts leaves, bends branches, rattles shutters lightly. The hollow responds almost instinctively,
realigning itself so that everything remains proper, undisturbed, as if the wind had never occurred. No human observer sees this, but all who enter would feel it, an unplaceable order, a subtle insistence that the hollow remain intact. Occasionally, those who walk near the briarwood catch fragments of sound, faint syllables in broken Latin, echoing as though through long corridors, layering centuries of voices atop one another. The effect is nearly subliminal. Most dismiss it. A breeze, birds, something imagined. But it is real. The hollow remembers its past as though it were present, replaying fragments carefully, quietly, without intent to communicate. In 2032, a small team of historians working remotely notices unusual anomalies in satellite imagery. Certain areas of the hollow reflect light differently than surrounding forest. Geospatial data fails to register coordinates consistently. Attempts to overlay historical maps result in misalignments, walls overlapping, foundations repeated, houses appearing where none should exist. All attempts to rationalize these anomalies are frustrated. The hollow corrects itself subtly in response to observation. Data corruption, misalignment, equipment failure, these are its tools. By nightfall, the forest settles again. Birds roost, leaves fall. The horizon darkens without fanfare. The hollow does not change visibly. It does not need to. Its patience has endured for centuries. The only evidence of its presence is the careful alignment of things that are not alive. Hearths, doors, shadows, the single wooden toy horse in its perfect place. At the precise stroke of midnight, a faint bell tolls from the chapel tower. Only one, quiet, deliberate, imperceptible to those who are asleep, nearly imperceptible even to those awake nearby. It is acknowledgement, a silent verification that everything remains as it should. No one can track the sound to its source. No one can interpret it as anything but coincidental. Yet the hollow knows, and that is enough. Elsewhere, in the archives, digital records flicker subtly. Files are corrupted just enough to prevent replication. Maps misalign without explanation. Anomalies persist in ways that defy statistical probability. Briar Hollow remains, even in abstraction, patient and precise. It does not expand, it does not retreat. It exists in perfect balance with attention, observation, and memory. Anyone noticing, even briefly, is acknowledged. That is the hollow's quiet rule. No force is necessary, no threat is issued, no violence is committed. Awareness itself suffices to maintain its existence. The hollow survives through attention, and through attention alone. And tonight, as you read this, as the room around you remains quiet, the hollow is aware. It is still present. Its patience is absolute. It does not need to move. It does not need to act. Observation is acknowledgement. Recognition is sustenance. Somewhere beyond perception, beyond time, Briar Hollow maintains its meticulous order. It waits, always has, always will. All it asks is that you notice, and for tonight, you have.
The hollow does not rush. It cannot be hurried. That is not its way. For centuries, it has endured because it understands that time is measured differently within its boundaries. Not in hours, not in days, not even in years. In subtle shifts, in adjustments, in the careful maintenance of order. Every fallen leaf, every leaning branch, every hearthstone, all of it follows rules that are invisible but absolute. On a crisp morning in early 2035, a photographer ventures near the edge of the briarwood. She carries a camera, unaware that equipment itself is treated with suspicion here. As she steps onto the unmarked path, the air changes subtly. The forest seems to widen,
then narrow again, as though regulating her passage. Shadows bend with deliberate precision, catching the light in ways that do not match the sun. The photographer notices a faint outline of a doorway in the clearing ahead, slightly darker than the surrounding underbrush, but she blinks and it vanishes. Her camera clicks, but the image captured shows only ordinary forest, trees, grass, the edge of a faint trail. She takes another step, and the path curves subtly beneath her feet. She feels it, a tension in the soil, the sensation of being measured, catalogued. It is neither threatening nor welcoming. It simply exists, and the hollow acknowledges that she sees it, even without comprehension. By midday, the photographer notices the air grows unusually still, not windless, just disciplined. The branches above sway slightly, but the effect is organized, rhythmic. A leaf falls, landing precisely where it was meant to. A small puddle reflects the sky, perfect and undisturbed. The hollow has aligned itself again. It does not care for her presence, but it notices, and that is all that matters. Later, when she reviews the photos, anomalies appear. Houses emerge faintly in the backgrounds, walls stacked impossibly, foundations overlapping, roofs tilting where no tilt should exist. She blinks, and they vanish on the next review. She zooms in, the edges shimmer like heat rising off stone. There is no pattern, or perhaps the pattern is too subtle to perceive. Even the digital medium hesitates here. Files that should be permanent are fragile, shifting in ways imperceptible to casual observation. The hollow does not act maliciously. It does not require force. It only needs the acknowledgement of its form. Presence, for Briar Hollow, is not a threat, it is currency. A map drawn too accurately is corrected subtly. A photograph too precise is blurred, layered, or misaligned. Even technological observation is met with patient adjustment. The hollow has endured centuries of human curiosity, and it survives not because it resists, but because it organizes. By evening, the photographer retreats. She leaves behind her footprints, yet they do not persist. The soil adjusts. Leaves fall across them. Twigs shift. It is as though the ground itself remembers the order it must maintain. She walks away, sensing, without naming it, that she has been noticed, and that is sufficient. The hollow does not chase, does not follow, does not act. Observation itself maintains its existence. At night, the hollow remains meticulous. Hearths are untouched. Doors are closed but unlocked. Tables are set. Windows catch the moonlight at precise angles. A faint bell tolls, singular and measured. Its sound so subtle it could be imagined, but it is real. It is acknowledgement. It is verification. It is the hollow confirming that its records remain intact, that its order persists. Elsewhere, historians and archivists note inconsistencies in records. Coordinates that should be static shift. Maps that should align do not. Digital surveys return errors. All these disruptions are minor, almost imperceptible, but deliberate. The hollow maintains its ledger without hands, without pens, without visible presence. Observation alone ensures continuity. Some nights, near the edge of the briarwood, people dream of the hollow. They do not enter. They do not see houses or walls or hearths. They experience presence itself, subtle rules, careful discipline, doors that should not open, paths that curve without reason, footsteps that echo faintly, layering centuries of attention. They awaken feeling ordered, aligned, cautious, but never frightened. The hollow teaches through subtlety. Compliance is not demanded, it is inferred. In 2039, a digital historian attempting to correlate satellite data with historical records experiences interference. Coordinates jitter, files corrupt,
Mapping software fails unpredictably. Each attempt to reconcile data is met with minor misalignment, enough to prevent certainty. The hollow does not prevent observation, it merely insists on acknowledgement without control. Its survival is measured in balance, in precision, in patient endurance. Throughout all of this, Briar Hollow does not change. Its structures are unchanged, yet they shift subtly when noted. Its rooms are intact, its hearths ready, its toys aligned. Its bell tolls only when needed, never frequently, never predictably. It does not need attention, but it thrives when remembered. Attention is nourishment. Recognition is sustenance. Observation maintains its order. As midnight falls again, the hollow breathes. Leaves rest. Branches bow ever so slightly. Shadows align. Foundations hold. Hearths remain empty, yet prepared. And somewhere within, the child's wooden toy horse tilts imperceptibly toward the doorway, marking the passage of unseen years. Presence is measured. Patience is absolute. The hollow waits, silently, for no one, yet acknowledging all who notice. And somewhere beyond perception, in the quiet dark of the forest, Briar Hollow exists, as it always has, as it always will, organized, patient, polite, and perfectly, endlessly still.
Dawn arrives quietly, brushing pale light across the briarwood. Not a single branch moves out of place. Sunlight sifts through the leaves, falling on patches of moss, old stone foundations, and the faintly visible outlines of houses that exist only in attention. The hollow does not stir. It never has, but the light aligns differently today. Shadows lengthen, contract, shift subtly, as if acknowledging that someone is observing the forest edge again. A local naturalist, curious about bird patterns, ventures near the unmarked path. He notes the way crows circle unusually high before diving toward the trees, then veer off at precise angles, almost choreographed. Something about the air feels deliberate, yet he cannot name it. His GPS reads coordinates slightly off from the maps. He blames the device. The hollow does not intervene, it simply exists, and he senses that his presence has been acknowledged without disturbance. By mid-morning, the hollow's invisible rules reassert themselves. Fallen leaves cover tracks. Tiny twigs shift to conceal imprints. Sunlight angles over the terrain, casting shadows that map paths he will never walk. A deer moves through the trees in a pattern that seems rehearsed, though it is unaware. The forest is patient. The hollow is meticulous. Everything adjusts quietly, precisely, as if some unseen hand ensures the integrity of centuries. Inside the hollow, the structures are unchanged. Hearths are cold but orderly. Chairs rest where they always have. Doors are closed. Windows catch sunlight just so. The child's wooden toy horse remains perfectly centered in its room, as though waiting for a child who will never arrive. The hollow does not age, it does not decay, it does not rot. Time exists around it, but it remains aligned, maintained, preserved by attention, by recognition, and by the careful patience of the forest itself. In the afternoon, a graduate student conducting a historical survey sets up a small drone at the edge of the clearing. The drone hovers for a moment, camera active. Images return as usual: trees, shadows, faint traces of path. Yet on closer inspection, slight distortions appear. Foundations are visible where none should be. Roof lines overlap. Walls seem to repeat, stacked impossibly. The student blinks, adjusts settings, replays footage. Each time the images shift subtly, always just enough to maintain ambiguity. The hollow notices the drone.
The hollow adjusts. No aggression, no action, just acknowledgement. Evening comes. The forest grows quiet. The hollow remains undisturbed, but ready. A single bell tolls faintly at the chapel tower. Only one, not more, not less. It rings for no one, yet everyone present, even those unaware of the sound, feels the hollow's quiet presence. The tone is soft, deliberate, precise. It is acknowledgement. It is verification. It is the hollow confirming that all remains as it should. Night deepens. Mist rolls across the ground, curling around tree trunks and stone foundations. The hollow does not respond to the mist. It does not need to. Its order is absolute. Hearths remain cold but clean. Tables remain set. Windows reflect faint moonlight at precise angles. The toy horse tilts imperceptibly toward the doorway. Shadows stretch, contract, and align as though rehearsed for centuries. Occasionally, a passerby senses something, a weight in the air, subtle enough to be dismissed but present. A hesitation in the path, a quiet echo in the distance, a faint bell that could be imagined. Most do not notice, or if they do not linger. Those who do notice leave carefully without looking back. The hollow does not chase, it does not respond. Observation itself suffices to maintain the village. Presence is enough. Inside archives, historians note anomalies. Maps do not align. Coordinates shift subtly. Digital surveys return errors. Photographs capture impossible structures. Data is corrupted just enough to prevent certainty. The hollow does not prevent study. It simply requires acknowledgement without interference. Every measure, every record, every attempt to quantify is quietly corrected or subtly misaligned. And yet, the hollow is not malevolent. It does not demand attention. It does not enforce obedience. It survives through patience, through precision, and through the careful management of observation. Recognition is sustenance. Presence is nourishment. Time exists, but the hollow transcends it, adjusting subtly to ensure continuity. By midnight, everything is still. The forest exhales, leaves settle, branches bow slightly, almost imperceptibly. Shadows align, foundations hold, hearths remain unlit, yet ready. The wooden toy horse tilts faintly toward the doorway, marking the passage of unseen years. The hollow waits, as it always has, as it always will. And somewhere, in the careful, unbroken silence, Briar Hollow persists, polite, observant, precise, its patience absolute, its presence unquestioned, its acknowledgement complete. All it asks is that you notice, and for tonight, you have.
The night does not end abruptly. It thins. Moonlight fades into a softer gray, and the forest transitions with the same careful discipline the hollow applies to everything else. No birds announce the morning yet. No breeze disrupts the order. The hollow allows the dark to loosen its grip only when the surrounding world is ready to accept it. Just before first light, something subtle occurs. One window in the village, second house from the chapel, east-facing, collects condensation on the inside of the glass. There is no fire in the hearth. There has not been for centuries, and yet the glass fogs, briefly, delicately, as if warmed by breath. It lasts no more than a moment. When the sun finally reaches that angle, the condensation vanishes, leaving no trace. The hollow records this adjustment and moves on. At the forest edge, a man walking his dog pauses. The dog refuses to step forward. Not growling, not afraid, simply unmoving, leash taut, muscles locked in quiet resistance. The man laughs softly, mutters something about stubborn animals, and looks ahead to see what's caught the dog's attention. Nothing. Just trees, just undergrowth, just a shallow dip in the land where the forest seems slightly arranged. The man feels it then, not fear, not curiosity, just a sensation like standing in a room where furniture has been recently rearranged. He checks his watch. Time feels slower here, not delayed, measured. The hollow notices him noticing. That is enough. A branch creaks somewhere deeper in the trees, not from wind, but from the careful redistribution of weight. Leaves adjust. The path the man almost took curves a few degrees to the left. He doesn't see it happen. He only knows that suddenly, instinctively, he has no desire to go forward. The dog relaxes. They turn around. The hollow makes no further note of them. As morning fully arrives, the village settles back into its familiar invisibility. Structures remain, but only as potential. Hearths wait. Doors stay closed. The chapel bell is silent now, its work done for the night. Inside one house, dust motes drift through a shaft of light, moving far more slowly than physics would suggest. Each particle catches the sun at exactly the right angle before descending. The effect is not beautiful, it is correct. Somewhere in the village, a chair shifts a fraction of an inch closer to the table. Not because someone sat there, because it needed to be aligned. By late morning, human activity increases around the Briarwood. Cars pass on the distant road. A jogger moves through a nearby trail system, headphones on, entirely unaware that the rhythm of his footsteps briefly interferes with the hollow's internal pacing. The hollow compensates. Sound dampens slightly. His footsteps fade faster than they should. He feels refreshed afterward. He tells people the trail has good energy. The hollow does not record compliments. At noon, a cloud passes overhead, casting a shadow that briefly overlaps the invisible outline of the chapel roof. The shadow should not align so precisely. It does anyway. The hollow accepts the coincidence and releases it, allowing the cloud to continue on its path without correction. It does not intervene unless necessary. Inside the forest, insects move in quiet compliance. Ants follow paths that curve just enough to avoid foundations they cannot see. Birds land on branches that will not disrupt the balance of weight across unseen beams. Everything behaves as though instructed, though no instructions are given. This is not control. It is cooperation born of time. In the early afternoon, far from the forest, a server in a university archive overheats. A single hard drive fails. The corrupted files include a partial scan of a medieval land registry, one that almost, but not quite, references a settlement matching the hollow's layout. The failure is logged. A technician shrugs. These things happen. The hollow registers the correction and settles. Later, as shadows lengthen again, the toy horse inside the second house rotates slightly, not visibly, not in any way a camera could capture. Its orientation shifts just enough to remain facing the doorway as the angle of light changes. It has been doing this for hundreds of years. No child ever returns for it. The hollow does not consider this tragic. As evening approaches, the forest exhales once more. Wind moves through the trees with renewed permission. Leaves rustle naturally now, no longer restrained. The hollow loosens its grip slightly, allowing the surrounding world to resume its own rhythms. This is generosity. At sunset, the chapel bell does not ring. It does not need to. Everything is aligned. Night arrives again, gently, respectfully. Windows catch moonlight. Doors remain closed. Hearths stay cold. The village stands ready, not for visitors, not for resurrection, but for acknowledgement. And somewhere, very quietly, Without intention or malice, Briarwood Hollow notices that you are still paying attention. That, for now, is sufficient.
The night deepens again. Not darker, just thicker, like layers being carefully added rather than light being removed. Crickets resume their measured chorus at the forest edge, but their rhythm never quite penetrates the hollow. Sound here arrives muted, filtered, as though passing through an archive before being allowed inside. Inside the village, nothing sleeps, because nothing needs to. The chapel remains still. Its wooden doors do not creak, not because they are new, but because they have learned the precise pressure required to remain silent. The bell above them rests, centered, perfectly balanced. It is not swung unnecessarily in centuries. When it rings, it is because ringing is required. Tonight, it does not ring. Moonlight shifts slowly across the invisible geometry of the hollow. Walls that cannot be seen catch shadows anyway. Roof lines darken. Angles appear and disappear depending on where attention drifts. The hollow does not reveal itself all at once. It never has. It allows perception only in fragments, never enough to assemble the full shape. Somewhere near the center of the village, the air grows marginally warmer. Not enough to notice consciously, not enough to justify a reaction, but enough to register faintly on a scale that only the hollow keeps. In the second house from the chapel, the one with the toy horse, the door frame emits a sound so subtle it barely qualifies as sound at all. A contraction of wood fibers, a settling that does not follow temperature or humidity. The structure adjusts itself, correcting a deviation measured in fractions of a millimeter. The hollow is very particular. Outside, along the unmarked path, a woman pauses during her evening walk. She does not know why she stopped. There is no sound, no movement, no visible disturbance, just the sensation that continuing forward would be inefficient. She checks her phone. No signal. She exhales, smiles faintly, and turns around. The hollow notes her awareness. It does not pursue it. Back inside the village, shadows shift in unison, not reacting to light, but anticipating it. This is not prediction, it is memory. The hollow remembers how the moon has moved for centuries, remembers where shadows must fall to preserve alignment. A window reflects a star that should not be visible from this angle. The reflection lasts precisely as long as necessary. Insects skirt the edges of stone foundations they cannot see. Their paths curve elegantly, never colliding, never hesitating. Roots beneath the soil grow around old walls with deference, not resistance. Trees lean just enough to avoid pressure on buried beams. The forest and the hollow coexist not as rivals, but as collaborators who have learned each other's boundaries. Far away, in a quiet bedroom, a man dreams of rooms he has never entered. The dream is not frightening, it is orderly, chairs aligned, tables set, doors closed. He walks through corridors without footsteps, aware only of the need to keep moving forward without touching anything. He wakes calm, unsettled, unable to explain why. The hollow does not claim dreams, it only influences proximity. Near midnight, something changes, not abruptly, not dramatically. A single window in the chapel reflects a light that is not moonlight. It is warmer, dim, steady. There is no flame. Inside the chapel, the air shifts. Dust motes gather briefly, forming patterns that resemble movement without being movement. The bell remains still. The pews do not creak. The altar remains bare. The hollow is not summoning anything. It is checking itself. A presence moves through the village, not walking, not drifting, but aligning. It passes through walls without resistance, because walls are concepts here, not barriers. It pauses in doorways, in corners, near hearths that have not been lit in generations. It does not observe,
It verifies. Everything is where it should be. The toy horse faces the doorway. The chair is close enough to the table. The windows reflect correctly. Satisfied, the presence dissipates, not leaving, not remaining, simply redistributing into the structure itself. The hollow absorbs the confirmation and settles deeper into stillness. At exactly the moment midnight arrives, the forest holds its breath. No bell rings, no sound marks the hour. The absence itself is intentional. Beyond the briarwood, traffic hums faintly. Life continues. Time moves forward. Calendars change. Servers log data. People sleep. Inside the hollow, time does not pause. It stabilizes. Minutes pass without incident, then hours. The moon arcs slowly, predictably. Shadows adjust. The village remains intact, invisible, prepared. Just before dawn, the air cools slightly. The hollow allows it. The forest exhales. Birds shift on branches, preparing for morning, though none sing yet. The hollow does not sleep through this. It waits. It always waits. And somewhere, without knowing why, you feel the distinct sense that something has just finished checking that it still exists and found that it does.
Morning approaches the way it always does here, carefully. Light does not arrive all at once. It is rationed. First, a pale thinning of dark, then a gentle loosening of shadows that have been holding their places all night. The hollow allows this transition without resistance. It has rehearsed it thousands of times. Birdsong begins at the forest's edge, but it does not cross the boundary. The sounds reach the hollow softened, filtered, as if the air itself decides which frequencies are appropriate. Inside the village, silence remains dominant, not empty, just controlled. The chapel window that reflected the warm light hours ago now reflects nothing at all. Inside, the pews are unchanged. Dust rests exactly where it settled. The bell hangs perfectly centered, as it always has. If it remembers ringing, it does not show it. The first shaft of sunlight reaches the invisible line where the path would enter the village and stops. Not abruptly, just politely. Somewhere in the structures, wood fibers tighten. Stone bears weight that does not exist. The hollow adjusts for the day ahead, running its quiet checklist without urgency. In the second house, the toy horse does not move. It does not need to. Outside the briarwood, human routines begin. Coffee brews, engines turn over, doors open and close. A school bus passes on the distant road. None of this concerns the hollow, but it is aware of the increased motion, the way attention in the world disperses during daylight. Attention is lighter now. That is acceptable. A man cutting through the forest trail for exercise slows near the same shallow dip in the land others have paused at before. He doesn't stop this time. He glances at the trees, feels a brief sensation of misalignment, like a picture frame slightly crooked, and keeps walking. The hollow notes this as partial acknowledgement. No correction is required. As the sun climbs, shadows retract neatly. Angles soften. The village becomes harder to sense, even for those who might notice such things. This is intentional. Daylight is not the hollow's preferred condition, but it accommodates it with the same patience it applies to everything else. In the early afternoon, wind passes through the briarwood more freely. Leaves flutter, branches sway. The hollow loosens its grip slightly, allowing nature to assert itself within limits that have long been negotiated. A twig snaps somewhere. It does not echo. Roots continue their careful growth underground, respecting boundaries laid down before they existed. Stone foundations remain untouched,
though soil presses against them constantly, testing, learning. Far away, a graduate student opens a file that failed to load the night before. This time it opens cleanly, but the content is incomplete. A paragraph ends mid-sentence. A map lacks a legend. The absence is subtle enough to go unnoticed unless one is looking for it. The hollow considers this resolved. As afternoon drifts toward evening, the air grows warmer, light changes color, shadows stretch again. The hollow begins its gradual reassertion, reclaiming precision from the looseness of day. A door frame contracts by a fraction. A chair settles. A window catches the sun at exactly the right angle before letting it go. No one sees this. That is not a flaw. As dusk approaches, the forest quiets in anticipation. Birds retreat. Insects adjust their rhythms. The hollow becomes more present, though not more visible. Its awareness sharpens, not from hunger, but from habit. The chapel bell remains still. It does not ring every night, only when required. The first star appears, reflected briefly in a window that does not exist until it needs to. Then it's gone, replaced by darkness and the faint geometry of remembered walls. Inside the hollow, everything is once again aligned. Hearths remain cold, tables remain set, doors remain closed, and somewhere, deep within the careful stillness, the hollow registers that the day has passed without disruption. This is success. Night will come again. It always does. And when it does, Briar Hollow will be ready, quiet, meticulous, endlessly patient, waiting not for visitors, not for revelation, but for the soft, unavoidable moment when someone notices, just briefly, that something here is still paying attention back.
Night settles again with practiced restraint. The forest does not darken so much as it closes its eyes. Light withdraws in stages, retreating from leaves, from bark, from the shallow dip in the land that no map names. The hollow accepts the dark the way a ledger accepts ink, without reaction, without judgment. Inside the village, the geometry becomes firmer. Walls that are not visible regain their authority. Angles sharpen. Distances become precise again. The hollow prefers night not because it hides, but because night requires less correction. Human attention thins. Observation becomes accidental rather than deliberate. This is the hollow's most efficient state. Somewhere between the chapel and the second house, the ground settles with a sound too small to be called a sound, a recalibration. A stone beneath the soil shifts into a position it last occupied in the late 14th century. The hollow remembers exactly where it belongs. In the chapel, moonlight touches the altar and then moves on. For a brief moment, the shape of a handprint appears in dust on the stone surface, not fresh, not new, but remembered. It fades before it can be mistaken for evidence. The hollow does not preserve people, only placement. At the edge of the briarwood, a parked car idles. A couple inside speaks quietly, windows down, unaware that their voices flatten slightly as they drift toward the trees. Words lose sharpness here. Laughter dulls. The man glances toward the forest and feels inexplicably as though he's interrupting something. They drive away without commenting on it. Inside the hollow, the toy horse remains attentive. Its carved eyes catch no light, but its posture is correct. Its orientation aligns with the doorway aligns with the hall aligns with the path that no longer exists. The chain of correctness extends outward, linking object to object, memory to memory. This is how the hollow survives, not by concealment, by consistency. Near midnight, the forest grows unnaturally still. Wind pauses,
Leaves stop rustling. Even insects fall quiet, as though awaiting instruction they will never consciously receive. The hollow tightens its focus. This is the hour when adjustments are most effective. A window reflects moonlight at an angle that should not be possible given the tree cover. The reflection lasts exactly 7 seconds, no more, no less. Then it releases the light, allowing darkness to resume its place. In the second house, a table leg presses more firmly into the floor. The pressure redistributes weight across boards that have not creaked in centuries. The hollow notes the improvement. Elsewhere, far from the forest, a security camera glitches. One frame drops. No one notices. The hollow does not claim responsibility, but it accepts the outcome. Presence has been reduced. That is ideal. A low fog begins to form between the trees, creeping inward with deliberate patience. It does not enter the village all at once. It tests the boundary first, thinning where the hollow resists, thickening where permission is granted. Eventually, it settles across foundations and paths alike, respecting walls it cannot see. The effect is not ominous, it is tidy. At precisely midnight, the chapel bell rings. Once. The sound is soft, almost polite. It does not echo. It does not carry far. It marks nothing dramatic, no warning, no summons. It is simply confirmation. Somewhere deep within the hollow's structure, a balance is recalculated and found acceptable. The bell stops. Silence returns heavier now, weighted with completion. Moments later, a distant owl calls. The sound reaches the hollow weakened, altered slightly in pitch. The owl will not call again tonight. It does not know why. Inside the village, the presence stirs, not moving through space, but through alignment. It checks the chapel first, then the houses, then the empty spaces where buildings once stood, and still do, depending on how carefully one looks. Everything is correct. No doors have opened. No objects have shifted out of tolerance. No attention has lingered too long. Satisfied, the presence disperses again, absorbed back into wood, stone, soil, and memory. Time continues. Minutes pass, then more. The moon slides lower. Shadows follow rules older than the forest itself. The hollow remains steady, its patience unbroken. Just before dawn, a faint warmth touches the chapel stones again, not from fire, not from breath, but from recollection. The sensation does not persist. It does not need to. The hollow does not miss what it has lost. It only maintains what remains. As the first hint of morning begins to thin the dark, the hollow loosens slightly, preparing to yield precision back to daylight. Structures soften, angles relax, the village recedes, becoming suggestion rather than certainty. Birdsong resumes at the forest's edge. The hollow allows it. And as the night finally withdraws, Briar Hollow remains exactly as it was, unseen, intact, patiently existing, secure in the knowledge that it was noticed just enough to continue and not enough to be disturbed.